तो आगे हम लोग पढ़ रहे थे, जैसा कि आप लोग जानते हैं कि वी हैव ऑलरेडी स्टडीड द silent feature of constitution. The some portion of the first topic of the silent feature of Indian constitution we had already completed. Now we are going to study about the second part of the silent feature of the Indian constitution, that is the rigid and the flexible constitution. Why our constitution is called rigid and flexible? Why our constitution is called rigid and why it is called flexible constitution? If we look into our constitution, there are we already know that it is a borrowed constitution from various sources. We have borrowed this particular constitution from various sources. Therefore, when we look into the features of the constitution, we will find that there are some part which need a special type of amendment. Depending on this what is the rigid part and what is the flexible part, it totally depends upon the nature of the amendment. What type of amendment are made in that particular constitution, or what are the process of that particular amendment, how that particular constitution is amended. And therefore, on the basis of that particular amendment, we can say that this particular constitution is a rigid or this particular constitution is a flexible constitution. That's why our Indian constitution, we say that on the basis of that particular amendment only, that our Indian constitution is a rigid constitution and our Indian constitution is a flexible constitution. And now now we are going to study about what is the rigid part of our constitution that based on particular amendment. If we take the rigid part of the Indian constitution, if we give example, how can we say that with example that this is a rigid part of our constitution, and how we are going to compare that particular part with other countries. The rigid part of the constitution, we can take an example of America. You can take an example of America. In America, the constitution is very rigid because the amendment process is very difficult. They have to give a special majority of all the parties, oppositions and states, because in America the states are under federation. Now what is federation, we will study it later. फेडरेशन का नॉर्मल मतलब आप लोग ये समझिए कि स्टेट जो है सेंट्रल स्टेट से जुड़े हुए हैं, बट दे कैन बी सेपरेटेड वेन एवर दे वे वांट. अमेरिका में ऐसे ही है. अमेरिका हैज़ टू कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, वन इज फॉर यूनाइटेड स्टेट ऑफ अमेरिका एंड सेकेंड वन इज फॉर स्टेट हैव देयर ओन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. दैट्स वाई अमेरिका ऑल्सो प्रोवाइडेड टू सिटीजनशिप. When we will study the topic of the citizenship, then also we are going to study these things in that particular topic, that America provide two citizenship, one for America and one for the person who is living in any particular state. Suppose that he is living in Philadelphia, New York, California, Texas, he will be a citizen of that particular state. After that he will be a citizen of America, but they are united together, United States of America, and they call Americans. But in India we have only one constitution. Whether that particular constitution is a, हमने पहले भी ये बता दिया है फर्स्ट वाले में कि whether it is a state constitution and whether it is a India's constitution. India and state do not have any separate constitution for their local laws. अलग हो सकते हैं, वो एक हमने पहले भी समझा दिया है इस टॉपिक को. तो आगे हम बढ़ते हैं रिजिडिटी. व्हाट इज़ द रिजिड पार्ट ऑफ द आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. द रिजिड पार्ट फिर इसका ये हो जाता है, इफ़ यू लुक इनटू द डेफिनेशन ऑफ द रिजिड पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, वी कैन डिफाइन इट A constitution, or in rigid part, we can define it. A constitution is a rigid constitution when it requires any special procedure for the process of amendment. कैसे, वो आगे हम देखेंगे. For example, you can write American Constitution. After that, what is the flexible part of Indian Constitution? The flexible part of Indian Constitution is that it requires a normal process for amendment. The amendments can be made very easily. For example, we can take British Constitution. They do not have any written constitution, but they follow only the principles. So amendments are very easily, they can adopt amendment by discussing among themselves. Now, if we move further, we will look into the process of the amendment, what type of process involved in amendment, on which this rigid part and the flexible part of the constitution it depend. The total process of the amendment which is involved is that any amendment we have seen that if we are doing any type of certain amendment where a special majority of members needed, that means both house, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha plus president, as well as there are some amendment where the half of the states majority also needed, then all these amendments are going to be done under Article 368. ठीक, if any amendment is going to be performed under Article 368, it will be a rigid part of the constitution. वेरी सिंपल तरीके, बहुत ही सिंपल तरीके से हम समझा रहे हैं इसको समझो. कोई भी अमेंडमेंट अगर आर्टिकल 368 के अंडर में जाएगा, इट विल बी अ रिजिड पार्ट ऑफ द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. बट if a particular amendment is not performing by this act, this article 368, यानी उसे सिर्फ नॉर्मल मेजॉरिटी से ही पास कर लिया जा रहा है, then it will be a flexible constitution. नॉर्मल मेजॉरिटी, कैबिनेट मिल गए, प्रधानमंत्री मिल गए, आपस में बैठ के 15-20 लोगों ने उसको पास कर दिया, छोटे छोटे बिल, वो फ्लेक्सिबल पार्ट ऑफ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन होगा. ठीक, ये सिंपल सी चीज़ें हैं. अगर जैसा कि हमने बताया थर्ड स्टेट वाले में कि 50% मेजॉरिटी ज़रूरी है अगर आप बड़ा कोई अमेंडमेंट कर रहे हैं, या ठीक है, ये आपका रिजिड पार्ट ऑफ द इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन था. Why we called this particular constitution is a rigid part of the Indian constitution, and why we called it as a flexible part of our Indian constitution. ये टॉपिक हो गया. नेक्स्ट टॉपिक वी विल मूव, द थर्ड टॉपिक विल बी of the silent feature of the Indian constitution. It is the flexible part of the third part will be the